You represent a number of companies on security issues of all varieties, including a number that operate critical infrastructure. What can you tell us about how the cyber security landscape has changed over the past year or so?
Sure. The cyber threat landscape is constantly evolving, and that's part of the challenge that the government and companies have here. So as the geopolitical environment evolves, as different sectors evolve, and as different countries develop capabilities, technology, and skills in cyber hacking, the nature of the threat environment evolves and changes. So increasingly there's attacks on the natural gas sector. The power sector continues to be the subject of intense focus by nation-state actors. There are new nation-states that are coming to the picture, and nation-states like China and Russia have significantly evolved and changed their cyber tactics and their cyber priorities over the last couple of years. So it's constantly evolving, and it's a tremendous challenge for all good companies and governments that are trying to defend themselves.
So as we become more sophisticated in our defenses, simultaneously the attacks also become more sophisticated and adapt to the defenses that we're putting in place.
Yes, we're always behind. We will always be behind. The threat actors are incredibly innovative. They're very smart, and it's very difficult to defend a large company or an important company or a significant government agency from sophisticated actors that have a very intentional goal and objective and information that they're trying to gain access to, compromise, or destroy.
Over the past several years, there have been a number of critical developments in law, not only in the United States, but abroad. Can you talk a little bit about those developments and their significance to the business landscape?
The laws at the federal and the state level are changing. The laws internationally in other countries are changing. And so it's important for companies, especially those that have a nationwide presence or an international presence, to be mindful of what these governments are trying to do. It's a significant challenge, and it's important for the private sector and the government to work together, and for both to understand the nature of the challenge and the nature of the solutions. We're always going to be behind the threat actors, whether we're developing technical solutions or legislative solutions, but we do need to scramble and work together to make this work. So in the United States, there's laws that are more regulatory in nature, and there's an increasing number of those, especially at the state level. But there's also laws at the federal level, for instance, that are focused on information sharing, which is a really important part of the cybersecurity solution set. So it's a fast-changing legal landscape, and it's created a lot of work for people like the folks that are in my field in cybersecurity and law, because it's important that companies know how to adjust and how to address new legal requirements.
Talk about some of the government programs that have come about over the last several years, both in the United States and abroad, and how those are helping and how companies are adapting to those.
So the laws are evolving. Governments, legislatures, executive agencies are adjusting to try to address this challenge. And so that creates new opportunities for companies, and it also creates new, often regulatory challenges. And so it's important for companies to be very aware of what government agencies are trying to do. Some agencies are regulatory in nature. Some are more in the nature of trying to assist companies by providing them with current cyber threat information. And so the opportunities for partnership with the government and also the possibilities of a regulatory and enforcement action are just much greater in this day and age now than it was 6-7 years ago when I was at the FBI, and we were just standing up public-private partnerships at the time.
Give us an example of an opportunity for partnership with government. What do you mean by that? What are some of those opportunities?
So the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, these are agencies that have access to threat information, whether it's from government collection or it's from their collaboration and their work with other private entities that have shared information with them. One of the great challenges in cybersecurity is to make sure that companies have the most current threat information they can get their hands on. Because with that information, they can take technical steps to try to block attacks and not rely on human beings really being very smart and not opening those sneaky phishing emails and things like that. And so DHS and the FBI are doing more and more to take the information that they have and share it with the private sector. In addition to that, private companies are doing a better job of sharing with each other. But we're really still at a very nascent stage in the information sharing world. It isn't something that we as a country do naturally. We're in a capitalist competitive market environment. Sharing is not something that we typically do. But for cybersecurity, it's crucial because that is an important way that we can address at least some of the attacks that are out there.
What are a few of the basic things that companies need to focus on in terms of making sure that their own house is in order? Just some of the basic steps. Obviously, the more sophisticated the company is, the more sophisticated and the more sensitive the information, the more sophisticated their defenses need to be. But take just a baseline scenario and talk about a few of the things that a company would need to do. Companies
need to address cybersecurity pre-incident and post-incident, and they need to be prepared for both. And so there's a lot of things that you can do from a technical standpoint, and the technical tools, the methods that we have to block and tackle cybersecurity attacks, the tools that we have for identifying an incident, a breach, or an exposure within your network, they're much better than they were before. But they're constantly evolving, and that's because the threat actors are constantly evolving their tactics. So it's important for companies to be aware and on top of the different technical methods and tools that are out there. There's an enormous number of companies that are innovating in this space, and many of them have really exciting and effective tools, but they're not necessarily the right ones for your company. And some tools are more effective than others. And so it's very important for companies to be on top of the technical cybersecurity landscape. From a legal standpoint, that's not really where we do some more of our work. Most of our work is done, we're addressing legal policy and governance issues, sort of the soft side of cybersecurity, which may be soft, but it's actually quite important. So the things that we help companies to do are to make sure that they've got good information security policies, that they have good contract language in their contract with third-party vendors or with other business partners, that they have, that they're ready with a good incident response plan that is enterprise-wide, that brings in all the key stakeholders that would be expected to respond to a cyber incident, and that they have processes in place for tabletop exercises to make sure that they can actually implement and execute those incident response processes effectively. On the post-incident side, companies have to be ready for that possibility. Those tabletop exercises are quite important. Cyber attacks, data breaches, they are an inevitability. They're not just a risk, and you have to be prepared for that day when it happens. And the companies that are better prepared, that have good incident response plans, plans that they've exercised, plans that have been proven to work well, they're much better equipped and much better prepared to deal with that incident when it happens and then mitigate the effects from a liability and from a public reputational standpoint.
What kind of companies, for what kind of companies would it be most important to develop those kind of relationships with the government agencies?
The government agencies, especially those that are interested in sharing threat information and information about vulnerabilities with companies, they tend to be agencies that are focused on critical infrastructure. The government has limited resources. Doesn't matter what agency you're talking about, doesn't matter what government you're talking about. They've got limited resources. They have to focus on what's most important. What's most important in this country is those sectors that are what allow us to function as a civil society. So you're talking about the financial sector, the energy sector, certain communications companies, water, transportation. These are the things that are fundamental to how we live our lives. That's where the government is focusing its efforts primarily. So when you're talking about the Department of Homeland Security, you're talking about the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and you're actually talking about certain parts of the intelligence community. They're very focused. They rely on these companies to get electricity, to be able to communicate. But then two, their jobs in significant part, as required by Congress or by executive order, is to actually try to protect that critical infrastructure so that we can continue to live the way that we have grown accustomed to living in this country.
One of the things you've worked on, Paul, is you help guide a client through the process of getting Safety Act certification for their entire cybersecurity program. Can you talk a little bit about what that entails, what the Safety Act is, and what the significance of Safety Act certification is for an entire cyber program?
Sure. So the Safety Act is a law that was passed in 2002. And what it was designed to do is to enable the government to help ensure that we have best practice security in this country to defend against a terrorist attack, but really it's to defend against any major attack that could cause chaos in this country. And so the way that it works is that it authorizes the Department of Homeland Security. This is the agency that's responsible for protecting our country's critical infrastructure. It authorizes DHS to certify a company's cyber or physical security technology or their service or their system for protecting even themselves as a best practice. And it's a very intensive process, and it is a rigorous review by DHS. But if you pass muster, and if you have that best practice, then in exchange you get significant legal liability protections on the back end if in fact there is that terrible act of terrorism or that major cyber attack or physical attack that is what's of concern to Congress in passing that law. So what we did is we worked with a major energy company to get its enterprise-wide cybersecurity risk management program certified. And in exchange for that certification, they enjoy those types of legal protections. And in addition to that, they get reputational protection because it's kind of like a stamp of approval. It's a public validation of that company's cybersecurity program as a best practice. And that's something that they can show to regulators, they can show to Congress, they can show to third-party business partners, they can show it to insurance carriers, and they can. It's a nice, clean way of showing that they've got a best practice. They're basically saying that the agency responsible for critical infrastructure has validated their program, and that says a lot.
And the Safety Act encourages companies to take steps like that, to innovate and come up with best practices, to be leaders among companies.
Yeah, it's really interesting. DHS is very focused on risk management. Risk management is really what is the key to cybersecurity and any kind of security program in this country. Risk management means that you're constantly evolving. You're constantly evaluating your system to make sure that it is addressing the changing nature of the threats and the vulnerabilities that are out there. Security is not a static process. It's not like you can say, okay, I'm secure today and I'm going to be secure forever. That's not the case. It's always changing because the threat actors are always changing. And DHS recognizes that. So when it comes to risk management and their Safety Act certifications, that's exactly what they're looking for. And it's designed to make sure that the company is able to address not only the threats of today, but the threats of the future.